Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Tuesday, February 28th. This is Africa 54. U.S. First Lady Jill Biden draws attention to hunger in East Africa during her visit to Kenya. The West African Economic Bloc, ECOWAS, faults Nigeria's Election Commission, INEC, for wrong delivery of polling materials. We'll have a live report from Abuja. And a newly created U.S. House committee holds its first hearing on U.S.-China competition with a testimony from former President Trump's national security advisors. All this and much more coming up on Africa 54. We begin in East Africa, where pressure is mounting on Kenyan President William Ruto to declare a national disaster over a record drought. The failure of a sixth consecutive rainy season is making hunger worse across the region. Ahmed Hussein reports from Wajir County, where more than half of the population is facing food insecurity.
Drought-ravaged victims desperately wait for help in Kilkile village in Kenya's Wajir County. Thousands of pastoral dropouts have set up camps along the roads to seek help from passing vehicles and aid groups, including Rukia Ahmed. She is preparing black tea for her children.
We have nothing else to cook now. We are here to get help, NGOs or people passing by.
Kenyan authorities say the failure of a sixth consecutive rainy season has decimated millions of livestock and left over 5 million Kenyans in need of humanitarian assistance. More than half of those affected are in 3 counties in Kenya's northeast, Garissa, Wajir and Mandera. Leaders from the region have been appealing to the president to declare the drought a national disaster, but they say their appeal is not being heard.
Every time we meet, we say declare. And the president has been promising. Well, up to now, we're still waiting for the president to declare drought as a disaster.
If the government declares the drought a national disaster, local leaders say people can get the international aid they desperately need.
Because it is a disaster. People are unable to find food. Livestock are dying by the dozens every day. I think it's time the government declared it a national disaster so that we could have gotten some aid from outside.
VOA called the President Chief of Staff for comment, but he did not return the calls. Kenyan President William Ruto last week considered the drought situation is critical and promised more aid to the affected areas.
The worsening drought situation requires us to urgently scale up response, especially interventions to avert widespread distress and suffering.
Ruto said the national government has spent more than $250 million on drought intervention programs since September 2021 and has allocated additional funds from the supplementary budget.
In the latest supplementary budget, we have set aside an additional 6 billion shillings for drought response intervention for the period between February and May 2023.
Back at the camp, some help arrived. The Kenya Red Cross distributed food, but only to a few households.
If these communities are not helped anytime soon, the situation is daring. The food need is really in crisis. Yesterday we have visited one few of the camps around here. Some are people from other areas like Warad. They come in to look for food idea. People are running under any vehicle they see.
Meanwhile, drought victims like Rukia Ahmed have little, if anything, left, except hope that food aid will come soon. Ahmed Hussein for VOA News, Wajir, Kenya.
U.S. First Lady Jill Biden used part of her recent trip to Kenya to highlight the drought and food insecurity. VOA's Anita Powell reports from Lositeti, Kenya.
The United States has provided the lion's share of humanitarian aid to East Africa after rains failed here for a 3rd straight year, causing unprecedented hunger that stretches from Somalia to this Maasai village just 3 hours from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. The UN chief for Kenya told VOA that 6 million people are on the brink of extreme hunger this year, and that the situation is exacerbated by the food supply crisis caused by the conflict in Ukraine. But the world's richest nation can't walk this road alone, says First Lady Jill Biden, who this week made a historic visit to the worst drought this area has seen in 7 generations.
The United States is providing 70% of the budget, the money that's coming into this region. But we cannot be the only ones. We need to have other countries join us in this global effort to help these people of the region.
The World Food Programme's Nairobi-based head of advocacy and communication, Brenda Kariuki, told VOA that the need across the East African region, which includes Somalia and Ethiopia, is vast.
We require $6.5 billion in 2023 alone to continue feeding the people that need it. WFP is aiming to reach 45 million people. That is a significant task, and we can't do it on our own. So we look to our donors, our partners, our governments to really step up and make sure no one goes to bed without food.
But as Biden learned as she made a recent visit to the predominantly Maasai village of Lositeti, the needs are greater. Women here told her that the drought has killed their livestock, ruined their livelihoods, and kept their children out of school. U.S. Ambassador to Kenya, Meg Whitman, says the country needs more than a short-term fix.
I would just underscore what Dr. Biden said, is that everyone needs to help as best we can here, because this is going to continue for the foreseeable future, and this is very personal. So,
yeah. And thank you for shining a light on this problem, because without you, the world wouldn't see it. You are the voice. So you're an extension of their voices.
Biden in all spent 90 minutes on the ground. Kariuki says that high-profile visit is important.
The presence of the First Lady of the U.S. in the region, especially at a time when we have a food insecurity crisis, is a significant moment. And I think she brings attention to a challenge that the region will have to address both in the short term, which is with food assistance and ensuring that people are not dying and going to bed hungry every night, but also to bring the attention to the world.
As Biden acknowledged, funding is stretched thin with the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, the war in Ukraine, and other crises that pull at heartstrings and wallets. But, she added, looking at mothers and grandmothers who had walked from villages within a 40-kilometer radius to meet her and tell their stories, these hungry bellies can't wait. Anita, Powell, VOA News, Lositeti, Kenya.
Nigerians were mostly accorded the right to vote, according to election observers from the Commonwealth of Nations, the African Union, and ECOWAS. However, the country's independent National Electoral Commission had several missteps, including delivering late and wrong materials, some to polling stations. VOA's Ndiho has more.
Nigeria's ruling party candidate Bola Tinubu has taken an early lead in the presidential race, according to initial tallies after a tight election marked by long delays and an opposition walkout over fraud accusations. Tinubu, a former Lagos governor, faced Atiku Abubakar, the PDP candidate in the presidential vote. The Labour Party's Peter Obi tested the two others as a third contender for the first time in Nigeria's modern democracy. Obi highlighted his challenge to APC and PDP dominance and won the critical state of Lagos, a stronghold of Tinubu's support with the most significant number of registered voters. As President Muhammadu Buhari steps down, many Nigerians voted to select a new leader that will do a better job tackling insecurity, economic malaise, and growing poverty. A joint election monitoring team from the Commonwealth, the African Union, and the Economic Community for West African States says INEC failed to deliver a perfect election.
Notwithstanding the shortcomings identified in these elections, Nigerians were largely accorded the right to vote. And we trust that the final stages of collation and announcement of results will continue to be handled in a transparent, a peaceful and credible manner.
Former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, now head of the African Union election observers, noted that the security issues presented a challenge to into the conduct of the elections.
Despite isolated incidents of violence, and the polls took place against the backdrop of a cash crisis following the redesigning of the Naira currency, while a range of stakeholders acknowledged this in a positive spirit and supported the policy of the Naira redesign, the mission noted that the timing of its implementation impacted on the economy as well as the logistical operations of INEC, the campaign process, and the conduct of election observation, amongst others.
ECOWAS says INEC failed to prevent several late and wrong delivery of materials to polling stations.
The mission, however, noted that the logistics delay in the commencement of the voting process in some of the polling stations, as well as some technical challenges experienced with the beavers machines, affected the efficiency of the process in some areas.
Ballot counting continues with 14 out of 36 states tallied. INEC says that Tinubu has won 6 states, Abubakar 5 states, and Obi 3 states. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
For more election news, VOA's Peter Clotty joins us from Abuja. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Esther. How are you?
I am okay here. Let me hear from you. What's INEC's response now that opposition parties are calling and demanding the cancellation of election results?
Well, Esther, if you can hear me, the opposition groups, 3 opposition groups, held a news conference a couple of hours ago, actually an hour ago, demanding the resignation or the stepping down of INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. They also called for the complete cancellation of the entire result of the election, saying it was a sham. Now, during the coalition process, they staged a walkout saying that the INEC chairman did not want to hear their concerns and issues they have brought up, including what they call voter tampering and a violation of the rules and guidelines outlined by INEC itself, stating that the electronic transmission will be the main mode of transmitting the electoral or election results from the individual polling stations across the country. Failure to do that, they said, undermines the integrity and transparency of the election. Esther.
Right. Peter, do we know what is really causing the tensions between local and international observers?
Well, the local observers, some of whom I spoke with early this afternoon, backed the assessment of the international poll observers, saying that the election itself lacked transparency and lacked credibility due to INEC's what they described as overpromise and underperforming, because INEC for months and months and months promised Nigerians that they will use an electronic system known as the BVAS to transmit election results from the polling stations. Now, they said failure to do that gives a lot of room for the election results to be tampered. And that is why a lot of youth groups are displeased with what INEC did. And that is why they are calling for the cancellation of the election results, Esther.
Peter, if you can sum up the key points raised by former President Olusegun Obasanjo, who is also calling for the cancellation of this election process, what is he saying in that letter?
Well, in the letter, he's basically saying that INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, cannot stay ignorant or innocent of what happened. And that some people in the INEC or INEC officials colluded with some powers that be to manipulate the elections to ensure that transparency was not adhered to. Now, his stance was that some people or somebody gave an order for the BVAS system, the electronic system, not to be used to transmit the election result. For which reason they think there was a lot of time that will allow for election tampering. And some ruling party officials dismissed President Olusegun Obasanjo's stand, saying that the election process is not complete and that you have to complete the process and other issues raised. If people had problems, they can go to court to seek legal redress.
Peter, thank you very much. Hopefully you get a reaction from INEC itself. Thank you so much for your reporting. Peter Clotty for us, live from Abuja, Nigeria. And for more perspective on Nigeria's presidential election, I'm joined by Idayat Hassan, a senior associate with the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. Idayat, welcome to Africa 54.
Hi, Esther. Thank you for having me.
Now, tell me, how would you define Nigeria's election?
Interestingly, as Nigerians, we have moved from a position of so much enthusiasm, excitement, currently to anxiety, and moving up to anger. Because a lot of things have actually happened in the last 72 hours as it relates to the elections. One has been the mismanagement of logistics by the Independent National Electoral Commission. The role the social media has also played in terms of polluting the information ecosystem. Voter intimidation and violence were experienced in some parts of the country. And of course, there were still some limited form of vote trading. So this is defining the elections. These are 4 issues defining the elections for some of us.
Idayat, there have been a lot of criticism leveled against the INEC, and we just heard from our reporter there in Abuja. What are your observations? Why are there so many?
I think one is that, like you said, INEC overpromised and under-delivered. The main challenge with INEC is poor communication and poor management of logistics. On one hand, the polls opened very late, in some instances as late as 12 p.m. when polling is supposed to end by 2:30 p.m. But anyway, it was extended. The second issue that is actually causing all this brouhaha at this point in time is the transmission, the electronic transmission of results. Yes, INEC have consistently mentioned that results will be transmitted on the INEC election viewing portal so that citizens can view it real time. But by position of the law, transmission of results still remains manual, which means in spite of it being on the IRF, you still have to carry the result physically from one layer, from the polling unit to the ward level, to local government, state level, and the national level in the instance of these presidential elections. So the inability to manage information means that currently the conversation, the narrative is actually being controlled by others beyond the Electoral Commission.
Oh, Idayat, what an insight there. We'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you.
Idayat Hassan is a senior associate with the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. Still to come, Africa is experiencing rise in cholera cases. We'll have a report.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, as Nigerians await the outcome of their presidential election, we'll review Saturday's vote. Will voters and candidates accept the official outcome? Also, Russia's war in Ukraine enters a second year. What is Vladimir Putin's endgame? We'll have an interview with Lord Mark Malloch Brown from the Open Society Foundations. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
In other news, hundreds of Congolese are fleeing their homes as rebel groups seize more territory in conflict-ridden East Congo. The M23 rebels last week captured the village of Mushaki in North Kivu province. Morocco has lifted a COVID state of emergency that had been periodically renewed by authorities for the past 3 years to battle the pandemic. Morocco's Airports Authority had already announced that travelers would no longer have to present health documentations on arrival. In South Africa's unemployment rate fell slightly for a fourth consecutive quarter, according to official data. Between October and December 2022, the jobless rate declined by 0.2% over the third quarter to 32.7% of the workforce. The newly created House Select Committee on U.S. Competition with China is holding its first hearing Tuesday, with testimony from former President Donald Trump's national security advisors and Chinese human rights activists. VOA's Catherine Gibson reports.
A wide-ranging examination of the U.S.-China relationship is set to launch on Capitol Hill this week. Members of a new House committee telling VOA that this moment is more serious than the Cold War.
It's a very different environment. I mean, we didn't need to, in a targeted way, decouple our economy from that of the Soviet Union's. The Soviet Union was a one-dimensional threat. It was a military threat. The Chinese Communist Party is a threat in a much more comprehensive way.
Lawmakers say the committee, led by Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher and ranking Democratic Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, will look at every aspect of U.S. competition with China.
Number one, our work should be bipartisan. Number two, that the Chinese people are the primary victims of the pattern of aggression from the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese people are not an adversary of the United States of America.
Committee members say the shooting down of a Chinese surveillance balloon on February 4th has focused the American public on the possible threat.
It actually has elevated the reasons for the formation of the committee to underscore the importance of us as Congress to understand what the pattern of behavior is by China, the things that we should be doing to deter any potential action. We need to be smarter. We need to be our eyes wide open about what's going on in the world as it relates to China.
And while the first hearing will focus on security, featuring testimony from former President Donald Trump's national security advisors, the committee will go on to examine a range of economic issues as well.
We have to explore the production of semiconductors and how our allies are now working with us to thwart China's expansion efforts. And I think we have to look at ways in which our supply chain isn't compromised in this process. Also, China has other efforts. They're making investments through companies, many of them front businesses in different states like Indiana, the industrialized Midwest, and other places.
U.S. agricultural competition with China will also be addressed, a key concern for Congressman Dan Newhouse.
These trends are concerning, that potentially our supply chain, as it relates to our production of food, is being compromised, that we're losing control, that we're ceding a very important aspect of our security, our food security, which is in turn national security.
But members also say the committee has to strike a balance to ensure their work is fair.
We want to make sure that we are strengthening our national security apparatus, while at the same time we're not fanning the flames of xenophobia and anti-Asian sentiment.
The committee is also considering hearings outside Washington for a first-hand look at possible threats to critical infrastructure. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for a health report, and in Folinomudu today is Mkamiti Kibayasi. Hello, Mkamiti.
Hello, Esther. How are you doing?
I'm good.
All right.
It's all yours.
Thank you so much. Africa is currently experiencing rise in cholera cases. The waterborne disease causes acute diarrhea and can cause death within hours if not treated. The first cholera death in South Africa has been confirmed. Malawi is battling its deadliest outbreak to date with over 1,300 deaths. I spoke to Dr. Neema Rusibamayila Kimambo, a World Health Organization representative in Malawi, who explained what the WHO is doing to end cholera in Malawi.
WHO so far has been able to, from its internal resources, to provide $4.2 million for the response, and also 1.4 million from the African Public Health Emergency Fund, which we oversee on behalf of the ministry. But other partners are also mobilizing resources, and I believe we are there to make sure that we are together with the government until we end cholera. And already we are beginning to see results. First, WHO ensured that there was significant deployment, both internationally and nationally, to help to address the response. We supported recruitment of about over 440 staff, and these ones are being placed in the 5 districts that are giving us most of the cases. So we said that at least within these districts giving us the highest numbers, that we would aim to have 5 to 10 cholera treatment centers that are actually up to standard. We have been able to set up about 47 oral rehydration points, and our target is to set up about 150. His Excellency, the President of Malawi, launched a campaign to end cholera, which they called Tetse Cholera campaign. And the key foundation of this is the community engagement. So it's about engaging influential people at community level, the chiefs, the religious leaders, engaging the local leaders, and then at community level to have community health workers who actually go down to the household level and ensure that they do active case finding. They do health education, they teach them about cholera, they teach them about hygiene, how to wash hands, about safe preparation of food, but also help to chlorinate water.
His neighbors Mozambique and Zambia are reporting cholera cases, while Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia are responding to outbreaks amid a terrible and protracted drought. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Mkamiti, and thank you to all our viewers for joining us on Africa 54. Have a good night. That was very good.